Hi, HR Nation. Welcome back to another episode of the HR Leaders Podcast, the show where we explore the future of work with industry experts and HR executives in the world's leading global brands. Today, we have a special guest on the show. We're joined by Norina Hertz, who is an economist, broadcaster, professor, speaker, and best-selling author. On today's show, we're going to be talking about her most recent book, The Lonely Century, coming together in a world that's pulling us apart. Welcome to the show, Norina. How are you?
I'm very well, Chris. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for joining us. I'm sure when you started writing this book, you probably didn't foresee where we were going to be today, or maybe did you? Did you have a crystal ball? Like many of us.
Obviously, I didn't. You're right. I didn't predict that we were going to be in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic, but I had already realised that the workplace was, for many people, a very lonely place. In fact, even before the pandemic struck, 40% of office workers said that they felt lonely at work. In the UK, 60% of office workers felt that they did so. In the US, almost 1 in 5 people say before the pandemic that they didn't have a single friend at work.
Really?
And over half of under 25-year-olds said that they felt emotionally distanced from their colleagues. So, right now when we're in the midst of the pandemic, people are working from home. A lot of the focus, and I'm sure we'll discuss it, is around working from home and how lonely that's feeling for many people. But we've got to be careful not to romanticize the workplace of the past, because that for many people was very lonely. Our challenge, of course, moving forward is how do we redesign the workplace so that it has connection and community and collaboration at its heart.
Well, just out of curiosity, where did this inspiration behind this new book come from? Is it something you was hearing from your own community and your own friends and family, or something you experienced personally? What was the inspiration behind the book?
So I was teaching at university. What I noticed was that my students were coming into my office in office hours and confiding in me how lonely and isolated they felt. And this was something new. I'd been teaching at university for many years. And the other thing I noticed, which again was new, was that my students were finding it increasingly hard to interact face to face. So when I was giving them group assignments, a lot of them were struggling with quite basic face-to-face interactions. And I remember sharing this observation with a colleague from an American university, someone who is the president of one of America's most prestigious universities. And he said to me, we're seeing exactly the same thing. In fact, it's so bad here that we're having to run remedial how to read a face in real life.
Really?
Yes, wow. For our incoming students. And of course, these incoming students are your new generation of hires. The youngest people in your workforce is a generation I call Generation K, and have researched extensively. And for this generation, who is already the loneliest generation in history, already incredibly anxious, already very concerned about their own futures and the state of the world, for this generation, even interacting in person, because they're all the time on their phones and on their screens, is increasingly hard. Something that as HR managers, one has to really actively work around.
Was that also the inspiration behind the name then? The book, The Lonely Century?
Yes, because this really is, as my research makes clear, the loneliest century on record. Lonely not only because people feel that they lack intimacy or lack friends or lack company, but also because people feel more disconnected today from their employer, from their colleagues, from their co-workers. People feel less supported, whether it's by their family, their friends, the state, or by work. And that's why this is the loneliest century we've seen.
How did we get here then? What's kind of led us to this now being the loneliest century?
So a number of drivers. Our smartphones are clearly part of the problem. Perma-connected, yet perma-distracted. We're together and yet we're alone. We've all been guilty of it, being in the room with our partner or friends and our head down in our phone, not really being present with them. So that's part of the problem. At work, the open plan office, some may think surprising culprit for why so many office workers are so lonely. There was fascinating research done by Harvard Business School where they showed what happened in an office when people moved from being in offices or cubicles to an open plan layout. And what they found was that contrary to expectations, the expectations were that people would collaborate more, engage more, communicate more. No, people communicated with each other in person far less. In fact, email usage between employees, co-workers shot up.
Really?
Yeah, because open plan offices are in many ways this panopticon place where everyone is watching you, seeing you, which
right, it's more pressure.
Yes, exactly. And it lends to a much more performative form of interaction and also a much less authentic one. At the same time, all the noise and distraction means that for many working in an open plan office, is you need to work there, you need to invest in a pair of head-cancelling headphones and put them on. When I worked in a open plan office, I did exactly that. And of course, everyone sitting there with their headphones on is hardly going to be conducive to engagement. With hot desking, my research showing even worse. There was a pretty sad story from my research of a woman, Carla, who had to take up a month off from work because she had an operation. It took her colleagues 3 weeks to even notice that she wasn't there because because no one had a set
seat. So you don't know. She could be on another floor or somewhere else. So we just don't know.
They simply had no idea. So phones is part of the problem for workers. The office is part of the problem and the layout of part of the office. We do less with people than ever before, less likely to be members of churches or synagogues. We are less likely to be members of trade unions. We eat together less than we ever did, or even than a decade ago. We live more on our own. All of these factors contributing to why this is the lonely century. And then, of course, there's mass urbanization, people moving into cities, leaving behind their support networks and their families often, and finding themselves in a city where often they don't even know their neighbors' names. And people in the city feeling abandoned, people in the countryside feeling abandoned because they have been left by so many people, left on their own. And then I think the other big contributory factor is really the kind of mindset that really has taken hold over the past few decades, a mindset in which being hyper-competitive, being hyper-individualistic, being hyper-self-interested were traits that we valued in society and in each other. And you even see this in pop song lyrics, which over the past 40 years have become increasingly individualistic. So instead of having words like we, us, and our in them, these words have been replaced by I, me, and my in song lyrics. And of course, I first world was always going to be a more lonely one. So those are just a few of the factors.
Wow. It's interesting because most of the things that you mentioned, companies actually portray that as the way for us to connect, right? We're going to do an open planned floor so we can all connect and collaborate, which is actually the opposite. That's what's happening. And similar with technology, people, we've got all this technology to connect us, to bring us closer together. And that's also pulling us further apart. So it's things like,
whereas actually kind of some more old-fashioned things have been proven to have a huge effect, like eating together. There was fascinating research done with firefighters, people whose lives we depend upon. What they found was that firefighters who ate together performed twice as well, those companies, as companies of firefighters that didn't. There was similar research done in the army with army psychiatrists telling me how they've really noticed less camaraderie and less bonding between soldiers since they moved from a canteen system to a pay-as-you-dine system where people would just come in and eat. And there was research done in America, a big study done, where people in a company, they tested giving everyone a break time at the same time to see what would happen. Massive spike in productivity. Not only did people feel happier, morale was better, but they also were kind of, as well as chatting about their weekends and things like that, sharing hacks about how to do things and sharing tips. Because we forget that loneliness has a serious business cost too. We know from research that lonely employees are less productive, they make more mistakes, they're less efficient, that the less friends you have at work, the more likely you are to leave your job, to quit. So loneliness is something we don't really think about that much in the workplace, beyond worrying about the mental health of our employees, which of course is very important to worry about, especially now. But we also don't think about it in clear business terms. And yet there is a clear business case as well as a social case for addressing the issue.
You made some really interesting points there. And I was thinking about my previous roles and current role in leading my team. And one of the most effective things that we did to build the connection and the culture of our team is once a month we'd get we'd do a big meal together where everyone on the team would bring a piece of food that represents their cultural heritage. So we had this like feast once a month where we kind of introduced, Indian food, Chinese, all different foods, and everyone was super proud, and we all connected around and bonded over this meal that we would have. And I always talk about that as like one of the things that would build real connection amongst my team members, because we could all bond over food, around
Absolutely.
food.
Yeah. I love that. I love that story. And it really chimes with a lot of research that I've seen about the role that eating together, cooking together, pairing food together can play, but also that point about bringing your own story and heritage and identity to the table in that sort of way, and being able to discuss and share difference as well, which is also something that can be incredibly rewarding and create much more authentic relationships. I think the other thing companies tend not to do is explicitly value kindness and care amongst their employees. And these kind of viewed as a much softer skill, often viewed in kind of a gendered sense, kindness, hasn't really been valued. In fact, in my research, I did a analysis of jobs that specifically ask for qualities like kindness and care, and they pay significantly below the market average. Really? And yet, kindness and care, especially in challenging times like these, actually can make all the difference. And there was one company that I interviewed for my book, and I was actually really impressed with how they manage it. Cisco, the big American technology company, what they do is they explicitly reward kindness and collaboration. And anyone within the company at any level, so it could be the receptionist or the CEO, can nominate anyone else in the company being especially kind or helpful. And the person nominated gets anywhere between $100 to $10,000, depending on what they did. And they have this real culture of rewarding kindness.
And you're rewarding that behavior, you're going to get more of it, right?
Absolutely. And perhaps unsurprisingly, they were recently voted as the best company in the world to work for. So, it can really pay off, this sort of behavior. But I think being lonely is also about feeling invisible. I think there's a lot more that companies can do on that front. I think one of the challenges now with working from home is that a lot of people are not only finding it hard and feeling really emotionally drained, but they're increasingly worried that they're not kind of visible with their managers, with the people they report to. They're not being seen. And I think companies now and beyond can do a lot better on that front too. And some companies are doing some really good work around virtual town halls right now, or also kind of really thoughtful listening exercises with their employees. Because as we think about how to redesign the workplace, I really don't believe this should be a top-down initiative coming from management. I really think this is something that organizations would be well served to co-create with their employees and really bring them into that redesign process.
One of the things we spoke about at last week's summit was moving from employer choice to employee choice. On the lines of what you just said there, it's super important that we listen from the bottom upwards as opposed to the top down, especially right now. You've done a lot of research for the book, and I'm just wondering, what was the thing that surprised you most?
I think it was probably that the young are the loneliest generation. So this generation that I call Generation K, so kind of 15 to 26-year-olds are actually the loneliest generation that we have, because we do think of loneliness as being something predominantly that affects and afflicts elderly people, and the elderly can be very lonely. 2 in 5 elderly people in the UK, their main company is their television or pet. But the young are really lonely, and I think that was more surprising. Even though I'd had my own anecdotal experience of this, I think seeing that in the research, and also how extensive loneliness was. In America, I came across people who were so lonely they were renting friends.
I saw that in the book, and I didn't have rent a friend.
Yeah, I actually tried it out. I tried it out as an experiment for my book. So I was in Manhattan, and I rented Brittany, a early 20s Ivy League graduate, for 3 hours. She was my friend for 3 hours.
What does that mean? What does that look like?
We had coffee, we chatted, we walked into a bookshop, we went into a clothes shop, we tried on hats.
Physically together?
Yeah. And like we would meet, like you would meet a mate. And at times I even forgot that I was paying her, because, it was like having a fun new friend. Not an old friend, but a fun new friend. Somebody who was
like a honeymoon period with your friend.
Yeah. Someone who's always laughing at your jokes. Well, at $40 an hour, should better be. And, and then suddenly we're in the shop, and my 3 hours is up, and we're in the clothes shop, and she turns around to me and she goes, "Okay, time's up. $120, please." But when I asked her, what was really interesting, when I asked her who are the main people who rent you, she said 30 to 40-year-old professionals working mainly in finance, consulting, or technology, people who've typically moved to Manhattan, don't have a support network, working really long hours, and don't have time to invest in making friends. And so there's, come an evening, they want to go to the movies with someone, they want to have dinner with someone, and they don't have that someone, and so they're renting a friend. And even more extreme, I met Carl in my research. Carl is a media executive earning 6 figures in Los Angeles. I met with him. He is so lonely. He's not renting a friend. He is paying to be cuddled. And I established, this isn't a sexual thing. Like, he is so lonely.
Connection and comfort.
Yeah, that connection and comfort. And when I found out how much he was spending on it, I said, "How can you afford it? I mean, you've got a good job, but how can you afford this?" And this was the heartbreaking bit. He said, "I'm living in my car." And he was like showering in the gym.
Because all of his money was going towards that.
Yeah, leaving his food in the fridge at work so that he could have intimacy. And he said that he was at work all day, not speaking to anyone, didn't have a friend there, felt so alone. And this was alleviating it. So these are of course extreme cases. Of course,
but they exist. Yeah.
I mean, when you think that in the UK, 1 in 8 people say that they don't have a single friend that they can rely upon, it really lands just how mainstream loneliness is. And there's so much that employers can do to really address it, which is, great for business, but also great for their employees.
I want to share a story which is quite close to my to my heart, but I don't want to mention names. But one of my close friends, we could see, was really struggling, drinking a lot of alcohol, mainly alcohol, just until he was paralytic, basically passing out. There was even a case recently where he came over to my house and he just kind of drunk himself till he passed out, and I was just like, "Wow, there's something wrong. There's an underlying issue here."
Yeah.
And when we finally kind of sat down with him and said, as all of his friends, we kind of got together and was like, we need to be here to support you. What it was, and of all the things that I expected him to come out with, he was like, "It's just me." And was like, "What do you mean it's just you?" And it's like, "It's just me." And he just kept saying it over and over again whilst crying. And this is someone who's in our circle of friends, very strong. You would never ever think that this person was suffering in this way. And essentially what he was saying was, I'm alone. I'm alone my whole life. It's just me. And that was his whole world. His whole world was this, even though he had all these friends around him, and in his head, he's like, I'm completely alone. Yes. No one cares for me, about me. I'm alone. And that was just like kind of a real eye-opening moment for me, to think that if that person's suffering, I'm sure there's so many more people that are out there that are feeling exactly the same way. And the fact that he was, turning to alcohol and drugs and stuff like that to kind of just cope with being alone, in his mind, being alone, was like, and that was only a few weeks ago. And it's like, proper. It's taken a, yeah. It was rough for us to, especially of us to hear that, as we thought we were there for him, but we clearly, in his mind, we wasn't. And that was quite hard to hear.
That's a really moving story, and unfortunately, what we've seen during lockdown and over the past few months is a really significant rise in people suffering from anxiety, depression, and loneliness specifically, and actually especially young people and women, actually. Not that men obviously can't be afflicted too. And I think we shouldn't underestimate the challenge that working from home is posing to so many people, because I think there was an initial euphoria among many.
Quite quickly, didn't it? Everyone was like, "Hey, this is great," and all of a sudden, 2 months in, everyone's like, "What? This isn't what I thought it was."
People are really missing the those water cooler moments, the coffee at work, just those micro exchanges with people, which we know from research can make a huge difference to how somebody feels. And video is just not as good a format as face-to-face interactions. We're making the best of it and we're doing our Zoom calls, but it's really not as good qualitatively. In fact, when we're face-to-face, what happens is when we're with someone, and let's say they smile, let's say they look sad, not only do we see it, but our brain waves actually mimic it. It's called the empathy effect, and our brain waves actually mimic it. And when you're looking at someone on screen, because there's a lag and because the picture is a bit distorted and etc., what happens is our brains don't have that same synchronicity. And so we just don't feel as empathetic when we're looking at somebody on screen. Mm-hmm. And so, I know some companies are viewing this moment as, looking at it as great, people are working from home, productivity seems to be doing okay. We can slash our physical footprint and have a massive real estate saving. But I would caution making these decisions, really quickly now, because firstly, I don't believe this is the new normal. People are creatures of togetherness. We are hardwired to be together physically in person. And maybe, and whilst it is undoubtedly the case that I think we're learning that maybe people don't have to be in the office every single day of the week, what we're also learning is that people really need time together and to be together to feel okay. And also, in fact, to innovate, to be creative, to experiment together. And we're seeing that things like innovation and creativity are significantly suffering as people are forced to work remotely. And so I think that's just a bit of a warning to any companies who are thinking, wow, this is kind of proof that we don't need the office and this is the end of the office. In fact, Laszlo Bock, who was the former HR head of Google, he found that in his research that working at home for 1.5 days a week was the ideal amount. So only 1.5 days a week. Of course, most of us are working at home the whole time at the moment.
Mm-hmm. I think from speaking to all of the CHROs and all of the research they're getting back from their surveys, it isn't a case of one or the other. People just want choice. I think that's what they're saying. No one's saying I want to work 100% from home or 100% from the office. It's we want the choice. Because now it's a situation where, depending on your circumstances, some people have kids, some people have elderly parents to look after, whatever it may be. I think we're just realizing there's no such thing. There's no longer this whole one size fits all approach is just not going to work. We're not going to go back. People aren't going to accept that I need to be in this physical location 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. It doesn't need to be that way. We've proven.
Well, I think what's really important, and the companies that have historically done this best, so companies that had significant numbers of people working remotely in the past, the companies that pulled that off the best were ones that made sure that they were very regularly engineering physical get-together.
Yeah, certain days of the week or month where everyone's going to be there.
Like pizza Thursdays or lunches with staff every week, or everyone in the office on these days. Yeah, because we need those times together. So I think it's choice, but recognizing that we need to build in and engineer these moments of social engagement and interaction. And then you raised, I think, something else really important about caring for elderly parents or children. That's the other thing that companies traditionally have been really bad at, giving staff time off to care. So not only parental leave, but care for elderly parents, get time off, do voluntary work in the community, help others. And I think as we come out of this really challenging period, a lot of people are valuing community and care for others much more than they did in the past. And I think if companies want to really differentiate themselves and be seen as good employers, I think it's not only about caring for your employees whilst they're at work. I think it's also about giving your employees time off to care for others. I think that's really important too.
Yeah, very, very important. On that point then, but what are some of the other things we can do then to help reduce loneliness for ourselves and our communities? What are some practical things that we can do?
Yeah. So for ourselves, put down our phones more, be more present with each other when we're with each other, for sure. Support our local communities more, buy more in our local shops, show up at local community events, initiate community events. If we're a company, what can we do within our own community? Whether it's if you're a B2C business, is there things you could be doing with your customers in your local community? But also, of course, what could your employees be doing with your local community? Value care and kindness more, whether it is when it comes to our partner or our colleague. And also consciously reach out to someone in our own network who might be lonely, whether it is at work or whether it is in our private lives. And, just picking up the phone to them, saying that we see them. If you're a manager, checking in with them regularly, especially now when a lot of people need more one-on-one check-ins, do that, be there for people, because especially right now, these are challenging times. And I think employers can play a really crucial role in helping people get through this. But I think also actively seeking out your employees' thoughts and ideas as you think about redesigning the workplace. A lot of companies right now are going through their redesigning the workplace, thinking about the future of the workplace exercise. And how do you really make sure that from the bottom of your organization all the way through, people's ideas are being solicited and heard? And we talked earlier about the need to listen, but there's also a real opportunity now to co-create a new kind of workplace that is really fit for purpose for the 21st century.
We went to technology as well. I just want to jump back there for a second, because at the moment, this is in many ways the only way we can connect. Is there anything we can do? We're all Teams, Zoom, wherever it may be, right? Is there anything particular we can do to make that a better experience and more inclusive?
So, and I'm glad that you used the word inclusive, because different people handle Zoom in different ways. For some people, it's really a very, very horrific experience. And, they don't want to see themselves on camera. They don't feel comfortable speaking if there's a kind of real group. So whoever's leading meetings, I think, should really be extra conscious of this and really seek to include different voices and different people. I think also circumscribing Zoom meetings. People are sharing that having a 50-minute Zoom meeting so that you've got kind of 10 minutes of just chat, either before or after, is quite a good strategy. Also, are there people you are meeting with on Zoom that you could actually be meeting with in person, socially distanced outside? I mean, it may be that there's a colleague or a customer or someone who you think maybe you could only be interacting with by Zoom, but actually might live quite near you, who you could go and meet up with. And we almost now have defaulted to Zoom.
You haven't even considered the other. I've got a good example in Arena. So last week, our last panel, we had 5 chief HR officers all in the UK that were leading the last panel. And we found out after we came off air that 4 of them lived within half an hour from each other. So there they are on this call, sharing all these challenges, and they're both, chief HR officers of these huge global brands. They all live within 30 minutes of each other. No idea. And now they're actually arranging to do a meetup, a socially distanced meetup, but they're like, oh my God, we live so close to each other. And they didn't, obviously, neither of them even considered asking, where are you located? I asked a question and said to one of them, where are you located? They answered. And then the other three were like, oh, we're around the corner. And now they're going to meet each other. So
exactly. Yeah, we don't even think to ask. And maybe that's something companies could do. Like, people obviously could opt in, because not everyone would want others to know. But, you could say, I want to opt into this. I would like to know who lives within a 2-mile radius. And that could be a great way of getting people to be able to meet up and feel less lonely in this period. And I think also respecting that, I know some companies are quite draconian about, you have to have the camera on in meetings and things, but and I get that, because they don't want to feel that people are doing their social media whilst the call's on. And yet I think at the same time, we do need to respect that for some people, being on camera really is a really uncomfortable experience, and kind of, I think, navigating that sensitively as well is quite important. And also recognizing that different people are having very different experiences of working from home. If you're living in a cramped flat with kids running around and noise, that's going to be a very different experience. Or if you're living on your own and feeling very lonely, that's going to be a very different experience from if you're management living in a nice big house and have a nice office of your own. So I think also being really mindful of the different experiences people are having.
Is anything that we've missed, Narina, that you think is super important to share with everyone?
I mean, I think we've covered so much. Yeah. It's actually been a brilliant interview. But I think basically, it's about recognizing that coming together is a benefit for businesses, and working to help employees feel less lonely and more connected to each other does positively impact the business, the bottom line. And with that as the starting point, because I know that HR directors, when they're making cases for investing in things, they need to show the ROI. So, there is a clear ROI here, recognizing that, and then really thinking about, how can we make our employees feel more cared for? How can we make our employees feel more visible, feel more seen? How can we help our employees do more things together, either virtually for now, but when we're back in the office? And how can we include our employees up and down the organization when it comes to rethinking the workplace as we come out of this crisis? I think companies that live to those values and that also explicitly value kindness and care will be setting themselves up especially well for the future and the opportunities as well as the challenges ahead.
Well, look, Narina, thank you so much. I feel like we can have another half an hour, but we've got to wrap it up at some point. But thank you so much for taking the time to share your experience. And I think your work and book is more important now more than ever. So for everyone listening, make sure you go and grab a coffee. If there's anything else, if there's sort of one parting piece of advice, Narina, what would that be? And then where's the best place for everyone to connect with you if they want to say hello, grab a copy of the book, etc.? Sure.
Well, I'd be very happy to engage with any viewers offline, or of this recording. So please contact me via my website, which is www.narina.com. My book, The Lonely Century, can be bought at all good bookshops and also, of course, online through booksellers like Amazon. And if there's one parting thought, thinking about where we're at right now and entering another period of restrictions on meeting together, really think about who you might be able to reach out to, who you might be able to help, who might be lonely, who you know, and do pick up the phone to them. Do arrange to meet them for a socially distanced meetup. Just be there for them, whether they are someone you don't know very well, a colleague at work, or a friend. Fantastic. Well, look, thanks so much again. And for everyone listening,
If you're new, please like, comment, and share. We want to impact as many people as possible. So take a second to wherever you're listening to share this with a colleague, a friend, as well, because it could really help them as well. Definitely grab a copy of the book and get in contact with Narina. Follow Narina on LinkedIn as well. Apart from that, we'll let you all go. But Narina, it's a pleasure, and look forward to speaking to you again soon. Okay?
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Chris.